Declan Hamill's attorney arrived at the will reading with a formal document and a very organized presentation. He had the typewritten pages, the notarized signatures, the 2 witness attestations, everything that a properly executed formal will is supposed to have, and everything that estate attorneys recommend to ensure a will's validity against challenge. Jerome Stahl had been thorough. The document was legitimate. It was also on the date Vera had written on a piece of stationery in October, superseded in one specific provision by a later dated instrument that Jerome Stahl had not known existed, that Declan had not known existed, that no one had known existed except Vera, who had put it in a box and trusted me to look. The estate attorney's cover letter, and the particular confidence of a man representing a position he believes is unassailable. What he did not have was the date on the sheet of stationery at the bottom of my aunt's wooden box. Under Wisconsin law, the date was the only thing that mattered in the end. Good day, dear listeners. It's Lena again, and I'm so glad you're here with me today. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and tap the like button. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments which city you're listening from. I love seeing just how far these stories travel. Most people believe that the last word in any argument is the loudest one. They are wrong. The last word is the one with the latest timestamp. Vera Quinlan was a retired school teacher who had spent 38 years marking papers with red ink and had developed over those years a precise relationship with dates. She understood that a date is not decoration, it is specification. It establishes sequence. It answers the question of what came first and what came after, and when the question is a legal one, it resolves the matter. She wrote her final document on a Thursday afternoon in October and dated it clearly, in the handwriting she had used for 70 years. And she put it in the wooden box with the same matter-of-fact care she brought to everything she organized, because organized things do not require explanation or ceremony. They simply need to be where they are supposed to be, in the right place at the right time, in the right order. She did not tell anyone. She trusted that I would find it when I needed to find it, because she had told me where to look once when I was in my 20s, and she trusted me to have remembered because she knew that I was the kind of person who remembered the things that Vera said when Vera said them in that specific tone. And she put it in the wooden box she called the record, and she did not tell anyone what she had done. She trusted that I would know to look. I am Rue Hamill, née Quinlan, and I am 44 years old. I am a reference librarian at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a research university with one of the country's largest archival collections, housed in a building that has been expanding since the 1970s to accommodate the accumulation of materials that a university library of this scale must house. The reading rooms have tall windows and wooden carrels, and the specific smell of old paper that you either find comforting or you don't. And I find it comforting, and have found it comforting for 15 years of arriving each morning and setting my bag down at my workstation and beginning whatever the day's retrieval challenges are. It is a place that takes documents seriously. That is the whole thing about the work and about why I chose it. A position that has given me, over 15 years, an unusual competence in knowing where things are, why they are where they are, and what they mean when you find them. I specialize in archival retrieval and in helping researchers locate primary sources, the dissertations from the 1920s, whose catalog entries have accumulated errors over 90 years of recataloguing, the correspondence collections that were processed in haste and need to be resurveyed to establish their full scope, the visual material that was digitized without adequate metadata and is now findable only if you know what you are looking for and have the patience to look carefully. The work requires a specific combination of systematic thinking and tolerance for the unpredictable, and acceptance that the document you need may be filed under a different name than the one you expect, maybe in a box that was labeled for other contents, maybe exactly where it should be, except that where it should be is a location that requires understanding the filing logic of a cataloger who worked in 1937 and is no longer available to explain herself. I have been doing this work for 15 years. I am good at finding things other people cannot find. I am good at understanding what a document means when you find it. The original documents, the dated instruments, the records that establish what was true at a specific moment in time, rather than what was remembered or claimed afterward. I am professionally a person who understands that the document in the box is frequently more reliable than the account from the room. My Aunt Vera Quinlan was my mother's eldest sister, a retired school teacher from Dane County who had taught middle school English for 38 years and who had the specific quality that the best English teachers develop: a complete intolerance for imprecision. She was sharp and private and distrusted attorneys in the abstract, while being, in practice, someone who had always had her affairs in order. Her papers were organized chronologically. Her correspondence was kept in dated bundles. Her financial records were maintained in a ledger she had been updating by hand since the 1970s, a green cover accounting ledger, entries in pencil for the first decade, and then, in blue ballpoint, the columns aligned with a ruler. She had been a school teacher for 38 years, and the habits of precision had migrated from her professional life into every other domain. Her kitchen was organized by category and labeled. Her medical records were in a binder with tabs. When she decided to update her estate plans, she did it with the same specificity she brought to everything else, clearly, deliberately, with a date at the top of the document and her full signature at the bottom, while maintaining, despite herself, one very good one in the particular. She kept her important papers in a wooden box with a brass clasp that she called the record, which she had brought from her childhood home, and which she had been filling quietly and methodically for decades. The box contained correspondence, land deeds, a small number of personal documents, and whatever she most recently needed to have documented. She showed it to me once, when I was in my 20s, and said, "When I'm gone, you'll know to look in here." She said this in the kitchen of her apartment on a Sunday afternoon in autumn. While we were going through some papers she wanted help organizing, she brought the box out from the shelf in the closet where it lived and set it on the kitchen table, and opened the clasp and showed me its contents briefly. Not exhaustively, not as an inventory, but as an orientation. "This is where I keep the things that matter," she said. "This is the record. You'll know to look here." She said it without ceremony. in the tone she used when conveying something she considered factual and expected to be retained. I retained it. 20 years later, I opened the box on a Tuesday night and found a folded sheet of stationery with the date October 14th at the top. She said it without drama, in the tone she used when conveying information she considered important and expected to be retained. Have you ever known a person so well that you understood what they meant without being told directly? Vera and I spoke every week on Tuesday evenings for the last decade of her life. These calls were not long, 30 minutes, perhaps 40, but they were consistent and specific. She told me about her week. I told her about mine. She asked about the archival work, about the specific collections I was working with, the problems I was trying to solve, the documents that were interesting and the ones that were frustrating. She had a librarian's interest in primary sources. She had spent 38 years teaching students to read carefully, and she understood, at a professional level, the difference between what a text says and what a text means. And she found the archival problems I described genuinely interesting rather than politely interesting, which is a distinction you can hear in a phone call if you have been listening to someone long enough. I had been listening to her for the better part of my adult life. I knew the difference. She asked questions about my work, the researchers I was helping, the particular archival problems that were interesting to solve. She was a woman who found things interesting. She was also a woman who, in the last 2 years of her life, had been thinking carefully about what she wanted to happen after she died, and who had mentioned once that she had written one more note about the money. She said it in passing in October, 6 weeks before she died. She did not elaborate. She trusted me to remember. Declan Hamill is my father's brother's son, a nephew by marriage, no blood relation, an actuary from Green Bay who is organized, rational, and thorough in the way that actuaries are thorough, which means very. He had been named primary heir in Vera's formal will, the typewritten document drafted by an estate attorney 18 months before her death, with 2 witnesses, properly notarized, leaving the $214,000 in her Waukesha savings account to Declan, along with certain personal property. Declan had had this will for over a year. He had considered himself patient. His patience had a figure attached to it, $214,000, Vera's savings, accumulated over a lifetime of public school teaching and careful management of a teacher's modest salary. He had been waiting, in his organized and rational manner, for the estate to follow its documented course. He had visited Vera 3 times in the 18 months since the formal will was signed, which was more frequently than his previous pattern. Twice a year had become roughly 3 times a year, a change that was not large but that had a direction. He had brought food on each visit. He had been pleasant and helpful. He had called more frequently than before. These things were true, and they were also, in retrospect, the behavior of someone who understood that a relationship with a documented financial dimension had a recent and specific financial documentation, and who was managing that relationship accordingly. I do not say this with certainty. I did not observe those visits, and I cannot know what Declan was thinking when he increased his frequency. But I can say that Vera noticed. She said once, in one of our Tuesday calls, that Declan had been around more lately. She said it neutrally. She did not say more. 6 weeks later, she wrote the stationery. Declan's relationship with Vera had been cordial and functional. He was not unkind to her. He was not neglectful in any obvious way. He called on her birthday and at Christmas. He brought food on his visits, a ham at Easter, a coffee cake in summer. The specific food gifts of someone fulfilling a social role with the correct props. He and Vera spoke about his work, about Green Bay, about the kind of neutral family topics that fill the conversation of people who are related but not close. Vera received him with the courtesy she extended to everyone and the specific warmth she reserved for the people she was actually close to, which did not include Declan. This was not a judgment on Declan's character. It was simply an accurate description of the relationship, which was cordial and functional, which is a description of a relationship and not an indictment of one. He visited twice a year. He called on holidays. He brought food when he visited and stayed for the afternoon and drove back to Green Bay. Vera had received these visits in the same spirit she received most things from most people, with courtesy, without particular warmth, and without confusing the form of a thing with its substance. She had named him in the formal will for reasons that were hers, and that she had subsequently revisited in October on a Thursday afternoon with a piece of stationery and a pen. The wooden box is a simple thing, pine, perhaps 12 inches by 8, with a brass clasp that is worn smooth from decades of opening. The interior smells of cedar shavings that Vera had placed in one corner long ago. The box was in Vera's apartment when she stopped answering the phone. I drove to the apartment after the second unanswered call, which was not like her, and I called the ambulance, and I sat with her through 4 days in the hospital, and she died on the 5th morning before I arrived. The 4 days had their own quality, the specific quality of time spent in a hospital with someone who is diminishing, which is simultaneously present and already in the past. Vera was conscious on the first day, and less so on the second and third, and not at all on the fourth. And I sat with her through each stage, through the shift changes and the monitoring visits, and the particular institutional quiet of a hospital at 2 a.m, when the corridor is dim and the ventilation system makes a sound that becomes part of the background after a few hours. I thought about her while I sat there. I thought about the Tuesday calls and the wooden box and the letter she had written in October, which I did not know about yet, which she had already written and put in the box before this particular Tuesday, before the phone had stopped being answered, before I had driven to the apartment. She had already done what she needed to do when she did it, on her own schedule with her own pen, in her own hand. She had already taken care of it. I thought about the weekly Tuesday calls, about the specific quality of her attention, always asking questions, always specific questions. Never the general inquiry of someone making conversation, but the directed question of someone who wanted to know an actual thing. She had been asking specific questions since I was a child. She stopped on the 4th evening. I drove home that night and came back the next morning, and she had already died. I took the box from her apartment the following day, not because I had planned to, but because I knew it was what mattered. I put it in my car without opening it, and I drove home, and I did not open it until the night before the will reading. I had driven home from Vera's apartment with the box in my car, and it had sat in my kitchen for 3 days before the reading was scheduled, and I had opened it on the Tuesday night before the Wednesday reading. I had not opened it sooner because I had been afraid in the specific way you are afraid of things that have the capacity to either confirm or disappoint you. I had not been certain what the box contained. I had told myself I knew to look because Vera had told me I would know to look, and I had been operating on that knowledge without testing it, because testing it required opening the box, and opening the box required accepting whatever was inside. On Tuesday night, I opened the box. The stationery was on top, folded once. I unfolded it and read it, and called Gwen Olerud. I had not been invited to the will reading. I called the attorney's office and they confirmed I was named, which they had not communicated to me, which I noted. Inside the box, 30 years of correspondence in bundled stacks, each bundle tied with a piece of kitchen twine, not labeled, because Vera knew what they were and had organized them for her own reference, rather than for anyone else's. The bundles were in chronological order, oldest at the bottom, most recent at the top. The most recent bundle contained the last 2 years of correspondence, letters from Ward, from a former colleague, from a community organization she had been involved with, and from me. 12 years of my Tuesday follow-up notes, the ones I had sent occasionally when our Tuesday calls had covered something I wanted to confirm in writing. She had kept them all. They were in the bundle at the top of the box. Above them was the folded sheet of stationery. I held the stationery for a long time before unfolding it. The fold was a single crease, horizontal, precisely centered. Not the casual fold of something done quickly, but the careful fold of someone who had folded it deliberately, who had thought about it being found, and had folded it in the way that makes a document easy to open. I unfolded it. I read the date first, then the text, then the signature, then the date again. A land deed to a parcel Vera's father had owned in central Wisconsin, a receipt book from a savings account long since closed, and a folded sheet of stationery. I unfolded the stationery. I read it once, then I read it twice. Then I called my attorney. The date on the sheet was October 14th, 4 months after the formal will had been signed, 6 weeks before Vera's death. The text of the document was in Vera's handwriting, the handwriting of a school teacher who had marked papers for 38 years, clear and precise and consistent with everything she had written in 40 years of correspondence. It said, "I am changing my mind about the money." Rue drove to my apartment when I stopped answering the phone. Rue sat with me for 4 days. Declan sent a card. The $214,000 in the Waukesha savings account goes to Rue Hamill. Everything else remains. It was signed with Vera's full legal signature, the same signature on her library card, on her medical consent forms, on 3 decades of personal checks. She had dated it at the top, October 14th. She had not had it witnessed. She had not notarized it. She had written it and signed it and dated it and put it in the wooden box. Under Wisconsin statute section 853.05, a holographic will, a will written entirely in the testator's own handwriting and signed by the testator, is a valid testamentary instrument without witnesses and without notarization, provided that the signature and material provisions are in the testator's own hand. The date was October 14th. The formal will had been signed in June. A later dated holographic will supersedes an earlier formal will to the extent of its provisions. the $214,000 savings account provision in the formal will was superseded by the October document. The account went to me. The will reading was in the conference room of Vera's estate attorney's office, a modest law office on the east side of Madison that handled the standard inventory of small estates, and that had been managing Vera's formal will with the straightforward competence of a practitioner who had not anticipated any complication. Declan arrived with his attorney, a man named Jerome Stahl, who had a well-organized folder and a very settled expression. Priya Hamill, Declan's wife, was in the back of the room with a small planner. My uncle Ward Quinlan sat in the middle of the room, having been invited by Declan, which I noted, because Ward's presence was useful to Declan only if Ward was expected to confirm Declan's understanding of Vera's wishes. I placed the wooden box on the table in front of me when I sat down. I had not decided, before the meeting, at what point to produce the contents of the box. I had the stationery document and the statute and the comparative handwriting samples in the portfolio beside the box, and Gwen Olerud had the presentation organized, and we had discussed the sequence that morning over coffee. We had agreed that the correct approach was to let Jerome Stahl complete his presentation, to give the formal will its full hearing before the later document entered the room. This was both procedurally correct and strategically appropriate. A later dated document that interrupts a presentation looks like ambush. A later dated document that responds to a completed presentation looks like a response. Vera had written a response. We would present it as one. Jerome Stahl presented the formal will. He was methodical and thorough, walked through the document provision by provision, explained the distribution, named the savings account, named the figure named Declan. He asked whether there were any questions. Declan sat across the table from me with the calm of someone who has been waiting and is now watching the expected outcome materialize. He did not look at the wooden box. He said in the measured tone of someone making a final statement, "Vera and I spoke about this." He said it with the specific calm of someone who has rehearsed a statement and is now delivering it in the formal setting for which it was prepared. He had dressed carefully for the reading. He had brought Jerome Stahl. He had his folder organized in the correct sequence. He had done everything a person does when they believe they are attending a proceeding whose outcome is already determined, and they simply need to be present and composed for its conclusion. He had not seen the wooden box on the table in front of me. He looked at it now, briefly, at the brass clasp, the same glancing attention Owen had given the portfolio in Tucson, the attention of someone who has identified a thing they do not have complete information about and is categorizing it while appearing not to categorize it. Then he looked at Jerome Stahl. Then he looked at his own hands and said what he had prepared to say. This is what she wanted. He did not say when this conversation had taken place. He had been looking at his own hands when he said it. He looked up at me when he finished, and I met his eyes and I opened the wooden box. My attorney, a probate specialist in Madison named Gwen Olerud, who had reviewed the stationery document the night before, placed the folded sheet on the table. She also placed beside it the applicable provision of Wisconsin Statute 853.05. She then placed a comparative sample, 3 pieces of Vera's correspondence from different years, in the same hand, demonstrating the consistency of the handwriting across decades. She said nothing. She let the documents speak. Judge Marguerite Tapp was present to review the holographic will before either attorney concluded their presentation. She had been brought in at Gwen's request because the document's validity was a threshold question, and threshold questions benefit from judicial clarity before the parties construct extended positions around an incorrect premise. She read the stationary document. She read the statute. She asked one question. Is the estate's position that the October document is not in the testator's handwriting? Jerome Stahl looked at the comparative samples. He asked for time to consult with his client. Declan and Jerome Stahl spoke briefly in the hallway. When they returned, Jerome Stahl said that his client wished to request a continuance to retain a handwriting expert to assess the stationary document's authenticity. He said it in the formal register of a professional managing a setback with composure. The request was procedurally correct. The framing was appropriate. The tone was measured. He was handling a situation that had departed from its expected shape with the professionalism that the situation required. Gwen said, "We have no objection to the continuance. We'll provide the complete sample set." She placed the 12-year correspondence bundle on the table with the institutional documents and the checks. Jerome Stahl looked at the size of the sample bundle. He nodded. I had known something was happening with the estate before the reading because of the sequence of events that preceded it. Declan had contacted Vera's estate attorney directly within a week of her death to arrange the reading before I had been officially notified. He had sent me a message offering to handle the estate clearance, the apartment contents, the personal property, with a timeline that presupposed the formal will's outcome. Priya had sent the extended family a brief email referencing Vera's wishes as she expressed them to Declan. None of this was aggressive individually. Together, it described a picture, someone who believed they knew the outcome and was organizing the administrative details around it, as though the outcome were already settled. The outcome was not settled. The wooden box was in my car. Ward Quinlan remained in the room. He said to no one in particular in a low voice. Vera mentioned that she'd written one more note about the money. He said it as though remembering something he'd been waiting to say. He said, "She told me about 6 weeks before she died." I wrote it down because Vera was precise about things and I thought it might matter. He had written it down. Ward Quinlan is 69 years old and keeps a pocket notebook in his left breast pocket, which I had always known and which had been a family observation for as long as I could remember. The pocket notebook in the left breast pocket of whatever Ward Quinlan was wearing, whether it was a jacket or a cardigan or a flannel shirt, always the same pocket, always a small notebook with a worn cover. He had kept notebooks since he was a young man. His entries are brief and specific, dates and names and single-sentence observations, the field notes of a person who moves through the world and records what seems worth recording, without knowing in advance what will turn out to matter. The October entry had mattered. He had not known when he wrote it that it would matter. He had written it because Vera was precise about things, and he had learned, over 69 years of knowing her, to register what she said with precision. I asked him at lunch in the spring why he had not said anything at the will reading before Gwen asked. He said, "I was waiting to see what you had." He said it in the matter-of-fact tone of someone who had watched the situation unfold, with a specific question in mind, and had been answering the question as it resolved. He had arrived at the reading without knowing what was in the wooden box. He had seen me place the box on the table. He had decided to wait and see what happened when I opened it. When Jerome Stahl presented the formal will, and Declan said Vera and I spoke about this, and Gwen placed the stationery on the table, and the attorney's expressions changed in the specific way expressions change when a document says something unexpected, Ward had understood. He had opened his notebook. He had found the entry. He had said what he needed to say. He was, it turned out, exactly the witness he had always been for Vera, the one who wrote things down and was present when the writing mattered, and which was now sitting open in his hands at the conference room table. Jerome Stahl returned with Declan and said they would request a continuance to contest the holographic will's validity, to retain a handwriting expert to compare the stationery document against Vera's documented writing samples. Gwen said, "We'll provide the full sample set." The continuance was granted for 30 days. In those 30 days, I went to work every day and helped researchers find what they were looking for, and I drove home in the evenings and made dinner and called Ward occasionally to report the status of things. And I did not discuss the matter with anyone outside Gwen's office and Ward. The 30 days had their own quality, the quality of a period when the important thing has happened, but has not yet been formally acknowledged, when the document is in evidence and the expert is working, and the answer is being confirmed by a process that you are required to wait for. I have always been able to wait for processes. The library teaches this. You locate a document and submit the request, and the processing takes time, and in the meantime, you do the other things that need to be done, and eventually the document arrives from the stacks, and it says what it says. The handwriting expert's report was the document I was waiting for. It arrived after 9 days. I have 12 years of Vera's weekly correspondence to my client, all in the same hand. Plus, her library card, her medical consent forms, and 3 personal checks from 3 different years. If you retain an expert, they will have complete material. Jerome Stahl nodded. Declan did not speak. The handwriting expert was retained by Jerome Stahl's office. The expert was a certified forensic document examiner from Milwaukee with credentials and courtroom experience. Jerome Stahl's office had engaged her specifically to find inconsistency, to establish that the stationery document was not in Vera's handwriting, or that it had been produced at a different time than the stated date. The expert received the full sample set, 12 years of weekly correspondence, library card, medical consent forms, dated across a 6-year period, personal checks from 3 different years, and from the same issuing bank. She also received the stationery document itself. She spent 9 days on the analysis. The report that emerged from those 9 days was specific and precise, exactly what a certified forensic document examiner is trained to produce. An observation-by-observation comparison of letter formation, pen pressure, baseline alignment, and signature characteristics across all samples. Every observation pointed in the same direction. The handwriting was Vera's. The signature was Vera's. The October document was exactly what it appeared to be. A document written and signed by Vera Quinlan on the date she stated she had written and signed it. The expert received the complete sample set Gwen had assembled, the weekly letters, the institutional documents, the checks. The comparative analysis took 9 days. The expert's report stated, the handwriting on the stationary document is consistent with the handwriting of Vera Quinlan across all provided samples, including consistent letter formation, consistent signature characteristics, and consistent pen pressure across all sample years. The challenge was withdrawn the following business day. Gwen called me when she received the withdrawal notice. She said, "Done. The holographic will controls on the savings account." I said, "Yes." She said, "The distribution can begin processing." I said, "Yes." She said, "Rue." I said, "What?" She said, "You opened the box." I said, "I did." She said, "Good for you." Then she said, "Come in Thursday and we'll review the distribution schedule." The distribution process took 4 weeks. It was not complicated. The holographic will's provision was clear, and the handwriting confirmation had removed the evidentiary dispute. And the remaining question was administrative rather than legal. Gwen filed the relevant documents with the probate court. The savings institution processed the transfer authorization. The estate attorney's office coordinated with both parties. Declan received the property distribution the formal will had designated outside the savings account, the furniture, the book collection, the certificate of deposit. He received it without objection. There was nothing to object to. The documents were clear. The date was the date. Ward Quinlan called me after the withdrawal. He said he was glad it had worked out. He said, "Vera always told me you were the one who showed up. She said it often." He paused. He said, "I don't think she was wrong." I thought about what Ward's words meant. Not as a verdict, I am not someone who needs verdicts, but as an observation about the specific shape of a relationship. Vera and I had been close in the way that people are close when they speak honestly to each other without the softening that family relationships sometimes require. She had always spoken to me directly. She had told me, in my 20s, when she disagreed with a decision I had made about a professional situation. And she had been right, and I had known she was right when she said it. And I had said so. She had told me a few years later, when she thought I was undervaluing my own work, and she had been right then too. She had told me, in October, 6 weeks before she died, that she had written one more note about the money. She had not told me what the note said. She had not needed to. She had known that I would find the note and read it, and that what the note said would be clear, because she had written it clearly. In the handwriting I knew from 70 years of family correspondence, and she had dated it, and she had put it in the box where she kept the things that mattered. Not as a verdict. I am not someone who needs verdicts, but as an observation about the shape of what had happened. Vera had made a decision in October on a Thursday afternoon. She had taken a sheet of stationery from her desk. She had written clearly, in the handwriting she had used for 70 years, what she wanted. She had signed it with her full signature. She had dated it at the top. She had put it in the wooden box she called the record, in the same box where she kept the things that mattered, on top of the stacks of correspondence that included 12 years of weekly letters to me. She had not told me. She had not told anyone. She had trusted that I would know to look in the box, because she had told me, when I was in my 20s, that when she was gone, I would know to look in there. She had been right. The $214,000 was distributed from the Waukesha savings account within the standard administration period. The figure arrived in the account I had named the record, and sat there while I thought about what to do with it. Vera had been a school teacher for 38 years at a public school salary, and she had accumulated this figure through the specific discipline of spending less than she earned, consistently, over a lifetime. It had not been easy money. It was not the money of someone who had been given something. It was the money of someone who had organized a modest income over 40 years in such a way that there was something at the end of it. I wanted to use it in a way that reflected that discipline. I opened a separate savings account for a specific purpose, a fund designated for a graduate fellowship in archival studies at the university, which I am in the process of establishing through the library's development office. The fellowship will support a graduate student each year whose research involves primary source archives. I did not name it after Vera. I named it, in the fund's internal documentation, the Record Fellowship, because that is the word she used for the box. And the box was the thing that made this possible. And the name is for me rather than for anyone else. It is a private name for a private meaning. Vera would have found this appropriate. Gwen handled the distribution with the precise efficiency she brought to everything she did. The court filings, the institution notifications, the tax documentation. I reviewed each step as it was completed. Not because I distrusted Gwen, but because understanding the process was my professional habit. And the process was interesting to understand. Probate is a specific machinery. It runs on documents and dates and the legal acknowledgement of what a person's intentions were at a specific moment in time. Vera had given the machinery a clear document and a clear date, and the machinery had run correctly. Declan received what the formal will had designated outside the savings account provision. Vera's furniture, her book collection, her small certificate of deposit that had matured before her death. He did not contest this distribution. At the estate's final administrative meeting, a brief procedural session at which the formal closure documents were signed, the room contained Gwen Olerud, Jerome Stahl, Declan, and me. The meeting lasted approximately 25 minutes. The documents were signed in sequence. The distribution was confirmed as having been processed. The estate was declared closed. It was unremarkable in the manner of correctly concluded legal proceedings, which produce no drama because the drama has already happened in the evidence and the arguments and the expert report and the withdrawal. And what remains is paperwork. Declan had arrived in the same organized manner he had brought to every step of the proceeding, correctly dressed, folder present, on time. He had signed the documents that were his to sign. He had accepted the distribution that was his to receive. He had not raised his voice at any point. He had been, throughout, a person managing a difficult outcome with the professional composure that his training as an actuary had given him. The composure of someone who has run the numbers and understands that the numbers are the numbers. He shook Gwen's hand and did not extend his hand to me. I did not require him to. The handshake he offered and the handshake he withheld were both accurate reflections of the situation. I accepted both as accurate. Priya did not attend the final meeting. I have not spoken to her since the will reading. She had written the family email referencing Vera's wishes as she expressed them to Declan, a formulation I had never heard from Vera in 12 years of weekly calls and 44 years of family life. Vera's wishes, as she expressed them to me, were clear, documented, dated, and in the wooden box. They did not match what Priya's email had described. I have thought about this discrepancy and concluded that it is the discrepancy of a person reporting what they were told rather than what they knew. Declan had told Priya what he believed. He had believed it correctly for 18 months. Then October happened, and the wooden box, and the handwriting, and the date. I opened an account at the same bank that held the Waukesha savings, and I transferred the distribution to it on a Wednesday afternoon in the branch near the university campus where I had opened my first bank account at 18. The branch manager who processed the transfer was efficient and pleasant and said nothing about the amount, which is the correct professional behavior and which I appreciated. I drove home after and sat in my kitchen for a while before making dinner. I thought about Vera at 32, opening the savings account that became the Waukesha account, depositing the first amount from her first year of teaching, beginning the accumulation that she would maintain for 40 years through careful management of a modest salary. I thought about her at 71, in October, taking a piece of stationery from her desk drawer, writing what she wanted to write, signing it, dating it, putting it in the box. The 40 years between those two moments were the same person, the same careful accumulation, the same understanding that what matters is not the dramatic gesture, but the consistent right action done reliably over a long time. A savings account, a handwritten note, the box she called the record, the trust that the right person would look. A procedural convenience since the transfer was between the same institution's accounts. I named the account, in my own records, the record, after the wooden box. It is not a literal naming. It is the notation I use in my personal bookkeeping, in the same way that Vera called the box the record, because the names we give to important things reflect what we understand them to be. The account is a record. It is a document of what Vera decided in October on a Thursday afternoon and put into effect by the act of writing it down in her own hand and signing it and dating it and putting it in a box where the person she trusted would know to look. I donated Vera's teaching materials to the Madison Public Library Archive, not the university library, which was my professional home, but not the right place for a school teacher's career archive, but the Madison Public Library System, which serves the community that Vera had served for 38 years, and whose mission aligned with what she had spent her career doing. I coordinated with the public library's archive director, who had been looking for exactly this kind of pedagogical material collection, the career archive of a long-serving teacher, organized and annotated, representing the intellectual evolution of a teaching practice over nearly 4 decades. We processed the donation over 2 afternoons. It is now cataloged as the Quinlan Pedagogical Collection and is available to researchers, to educators, to anyone who wants to understand what 38 years of English teaching in Wisconsin looked like when the teacher was precise and cared about the work, which is how Vera wanted to be understood. 38 years of curriculum development, annotated texts, student correspondence she had preserved, assessment frameworks she had built over a career. The library archivist met with me to review the materials. We spent the afternoon together in the processing room, going through the boxes in the order Vera had organized them. Vera had organized them by year and then by category: curriculum materials, student work samples she had kept, her own professional development files, her annotated copies of the texts she had taught. The annotation was the thing the archivist kept returning to. Vera had marked her teaching copies with the specific observations of someone who had read the same texts multiple times with different groups of students and had tracked the changes in her own understanding across the years. The margins of her copy of a novel she had taught for 15 years contained 15 years of shifting commentary. The interpretive layers of a mind that kept reading things it thought it already knew. She spent 2 hours with the boxes before she said anything. Then she said she was a precise teacher. I said she was a precise person. The archivist said, "These materials are exactly what we look for. They're dated, organized, internally consistent across the years." I said she was like that about everything. Ward called again in the spring to say he was driving through Madison and wanted to see me. We met for lunch. He brought the pocket notebook. He showed me the entry, a single line in his small handwriting. Vera said she wrote a note about the money. October, about 6 weeks before she died. Vera's name in Ward's handwriting, in a notebook he had kept in his breast pocket for 40 years. He said, "I wrote it down because Vera was precise about things, and I knew it might matter." It had mattered. I told him so. The wooden box sits on my desk at the library. I keep the clasp unlatched so I can open it easily when I need to. I open it occasionally, not to review the contents, which I know, but in the way you open something you want to confirm is still there. The stationery is there. October 14th. Vera's handwriting. Her signature. The same signature I saw on 44 years of birthday cards and Christmas cards, and the occasional letter when the Tuesday call had not been long enough to cover what needed to be covered. The signature of someone who learned cursive in the 1950s and kept the letters consistent for 70 years, as precise and reliable as everything else about her. I look at it sometimes in the morning light. I close the box. I begin the day. I brought it to work 6 weeks after the estate closed, because it is the kind of object that belongs in a place where documents are understood to matter. It sits beside my desk lamp and my reference volumes, and the library's archival catalog, and it catches the morning light when the east window is clear, and it is simply there, present and quiet, as boxes are present and quiet. The stationery is inside it, returned to its position in the stack. Below the stationery are Vera's bundled correspondence, the land deed, the closed savings account records, the full record of what she kept and why she kept it. I have not reorganized the box. I have left it in the order Vera established, the order she organized, for her own reference, over decades. The box is hers. The contents are hers. What passed to me is the account in the Waukesha Bank and the October 14th document, and the understanding of what the box was for and why she showed it to me when I was in my 20s, and what she meant when she said, "You'll know to look." October 14th in Vera's handwriting, clear and precise and consistent with 70 years of the same hand forming the same letters on the same kind of paper. She wrote it on a Thursday. She dated it. She put it in the box. She trusted me to find it. If your family has ever produced a document that changed everything, a handwritten note, a letter, a dated instrument put into a box by someone who understood that the box was where the important things lived, tell me about it in the comments below. Tell me whether the document was expected or whether it appeared from somewhere you had not thought to look. Tell me whether the person who put it there trusted you to find it, and whether they were right to trust you. Tell me whether the date on the document was the thing that mattered, in the end, as dates almost always are because documents live and die by their dates. And the person who understands this writes the date clearly at the top of the page in the handwriting they have used for 70 years and puts the document in a box called the record and trusts the person who knows to look. A note, a letter, something written by hand in the kind of handwriting you would recognize anywhere. Tell me about it in the comments below. Tell me whether the document was where you expected it to be, or whether it appeared from somewhere surprising. Tell me which city you are listening from. The library is quiet this morning, and the wooden box is on my desk, and the morning light is on the brass clasp, and everything is in order. Thank you for being here. Stay with Lena. We have more of these.